right. So this is Leading with Empathy and Allyship, a live event and podcast series. I'm your host, Melinda Briana Epler, the founder and CEO of Change Catalyst, where we build inclusive innovation through consulting, training, and events. In this series, we go deep and we get real. We build empathy and explore tangible, actionable steps we can all take to be better allies and better advocates for each other. So today we're talking with somebody that I love talking with and always learn from you, Danny. Danny Allen, VP of Tech Diversity and Inclusion at SAP Labs. Welcome.
Thank you, thank you, thank you.
Yeah.
Appreciate that.
Yeah.
Pleasure to be here.
Glad you're here. Glad you're here. I'm gonna talk about a couple of logistics and then we'll dive into conversation. Just so everybody knows, we have an ASL interpreter on screen, Kalina. Our interpreters are sponsored by Interpreter Now. Really grateful for that partnership. We also have live captions. So if you want to turn on live captions, go to the bottom of your screen and click closed caption. And then our team, Renzo, Sally, Antonia, and Juliet, thank you to them. They're, among other things, many other things, monitoring the chat and the Q&A throughout our time. So if you have questions, if you have thoughts, please put them in the chat. Love to hear what's resonating for you, aha moments you're experiencing, and then use the Q&A function down at the bottom of your screen for any questions for Danny and I, and we'll save some time toward the end to really dive into those questions. All right. So Danny, yeah, again, I really appreciate you and appreciate all the wisdom, and I've learned a lot from you in every conversation we've had. So I'm really excited to have this conversation with you. Yeah. Could we start by you just giving us a bit of your story, how you came to be doing what you're doing now?
So it's probably not that thrilling, but I've been in the tech industry for more than 30 years. And when I first came in, I was always the one of 1,000. But I think overall, since my background is network security and cloud engineering, overall, it's been a passion of mine to be most inclusive. And my teams are always kind of known as the United Nations. I think there's a plus in that and maybe a minus as well. People recognizing the fact that we were very different. But so it's 4.5 years ago, it was April Fool's Day in 2016 that I started full-time into this focus on underrepresented. Yeah, so loud. But the idea is that in the tech industry, if you think about the two income or wealth creation groupings, you have Wall Street and then you have Silicon Valley or the tech industry. And I was looking at it from the perspective of, we have so few people who are engaged that are different. And we have so many people making money. And we have this need for society to be inclusive and bring everyone along. But just the way things are working, it wasn't happening that way. So I decided to push forth, focus on this underrepresented, and underrepresented for me was, especially with regard to the United States, Black or African American, Latino, as I say, North America, Central America, Latin America, and the Caribbean, not just people who speak Spanish, Native American or indigenous folks, and then Pacific Islanders. Those are the ones I see as underrepresented in the tech industry. But realistically, it was a matter of trying to bring some inclusive equity to where I was career-wise.
Mm. Do you mind talking a little bit about your experience as an engineer over the years in Silicon Valley, and as a Black engineer in particular, and kind of what was like? I mean, you've been doing this for quite a while, and I think, yeah, I think that's interesting. Yeah.
Yeah. So I think, so going back, when I first came into the industry, I really wanted to be a telecom engineer. And I started on the low end as a, what do we call it, field telecom engineer, field telecom support person. And that was shortly after working at NCR on electronic cash registers and all this other kind of good stuff. But in Silicon Valley, after leaving Bank of America, and I spent 3+ years in Asia with Bank of America in telecom. But in Silicon Valley, it was just, I guess, in a word, it was lonely. But it wasn't like I was the only person. I mean, we had people at Hewlett Packard and Silicon Graphics and Sun Microsystems that were people of color and in positions of power. There weren't a lot of people. There were very few women at all in leadership roles. In fact, that was probably as they kind of started in that area. There were very few people of Indian descent, the Indian subcontinent descent. There were more people who would be considered Sino-Asian. But ultimately, it wasn't a kind of challenging in the respect that you didn't have a lot of people to engage in that were from your background. But even though it was lonely, it was kind of better than what I'm seeing right now. So it's, I don't think things have changed much is what I'm really getting at. I don't think things have changed much. And early on in Silicon Valley, you have to realize that it was the Department of Defense and Department of Energy that really provided the backbone for what we were doing. And if you think of the internet in general, the Defense Advanced Research Projects Agency, DARPANet, was the forerunner. And you had people coming out of the military that were more diverse than what you saw otherwise. So as you look back, the companies were maybe more defense dependent, even though when I first came to Silicon Valley, I was working for Amdahl Corporation, which was the competitor of IBM at the time. But ultimately, as we saw the government pull back from really these investments in the tech industry to be more of a consumer of technology, even though a lot of the research in the institutions was being funded through the government. And you saw the people come in with the venture money. That's when things really changed. I mean, that's when the affinity became really obvious. If you weren't from certain groups, you weren't going to be part of what was happening. And so lonely then, lonely now. And there have been some improvements, but we haven't changed much.
Yeah. So you decided then on April Fool's Day 2016 to work on that, to make a difference there.
So in May of 2015, we started what was called SAP Project Propel. And so I'd gone to SAP was out of a startup in 2009. Yeah, 2009. At the end of 2012, we started the Black Employee Network because there was like 5 of us on a campus of 2,400. And as we progressed through, starting the SAP Project Propel, which is focused on HBCU, or historically Black colleges and universities, and other minority serving institutions to make these changes, we really pushed toward education that would bring those scholars into the mainstream of the tech industry so that they can come in and have better career and life outcomes. But in 2016, I basically had enough. Wasn't seeing the progress. And it really comes down to, do you just keep doing what you're doing and working on your career, or do you really try to make a difference? And so for me, impact is more important. I wouldn't say it's more important than income, but it's very important. Yeah, you need the income to be able to have the ability to do a number of things. But
Yeah.
for me, it was really focusing on putting that foot forward and walking out on faith and saying, look, if there's going to be a change, it has to be somebody driving that change. So that's really what it comes back to.
And tell us some of the things that what are you working on now? I mean, you're doing a lot. What is that? What are you doing to create change?
So right now, if you think about accountability, um, the tech industry is very data driven. In fact, most industries probably now data driven. So looking at what that means in terms of your hiring rate, your share of workforce, your promotion and progression rates, your attrition, voluntary and involuntary um, terminations kind of stuff. You look at all those pieces, whether it's gender or the generational aspects of it, ethnicity. We don't focus on the LGBTQ plus side of things because of SAP is a German company, so we're really into this GDPR, the data protection stuff. And you'd have to identify, and then we go through a bunch of legal stuff. But looking at veteran status and difference, whether that's mobility, vision, hearing, or where you sit on the spectrum, autism spectrum, and SAP has a big autism at work program. The focus is to have the reporting such that you can tell what's going on and that you can hold people's feet to the fire and say, there are things that need to be done. So that's the diversity dashboard, which I'm the business owner of. So that's one piece. Ultimately, it's about aligning the talent development with the needs of industry, and that's where this push to SAP Project Propel still exists. It's more of a community now where we're sharing and trying to bring things along. But how do we work with the institutions that are bringing that talent to the market, generally untapped or underappreciated talent? Internal to SAP, it's more about the embrace of difference, trying to figure out how do we get people to see each other for the value of their difference. And some of that's in working with this inclusive culture work stream, working to highlight the employee network groups, as we call them. You might call them employee resource groups or business resource groups. Doesn't, I mean, it's essentially the same thing. But these groups, how do you bring people into the fore where they're actively engaging and advocating for their particular perspectives? And how do you also look at the people who have gone in and become leaders of those groups such that you can move them into management roles? That's a little more difficult, but it's one of those pieces that happen. So that's the inclusive culture work stream, in addition to what we do, trying to identify who is an inclusive leader and how you pattern after that. So it's kind of a pattern matching thing where you want people to emulate somebody who's doing something really well. So those are two pieces. The dashboard for accountability, the focus on embracing difference, and then what are we doing in terms of our initiatives? I lead an initiative called Triple Double, which is more of a metaphor for outstanding performance. In basketball, it's that excellent performer that in 3 categories they've done something. It could be in rebounds or points scored or steals or whatever it is, but it's outstanding performance. And so when you look at what's the benefit of having a diverse talent pipeline, it's having the ability to bring in this difference, which makes you better based upon all the research, whether you talk about McKinsey or anybody else. The other piece of that is, how do you find the people who are going to be decision makers, the executive leadership? And so part of those initiatives are identifying who could come in as executive leaders and trying to get them on board. And then the third part of it is about the building of the ecosystem. The challenges we've had we've always go back to, well, we need the pipeline. We don't have the pipeline. And you know, pipeline is a convenient excuse.
Yeah.
The truth is, you need the people in your pipeline that are aligned with your needs as a company So again, back to the school piece, and then our specific initiatives looking at who fits in there. But how do you build this such that it's self-fulfilling? And that's where the ecosystem comes in, trying to build a foundational and sustainable way for us to provide additional talent. It doesn't have to come to SAP. It can go to any of SAP's customers or partners, 440,000 plus customers and over 20,000 partners. And some of those partners are those household names that you hear, Google, Microsoft, Apple, but they're also EY, Accenture, and other places. But how do you build this infrastructure? So in that respect, the focus is to expose, especially venture funds and venture founders, the small companies, or maybe companies that have been around for a while that are focused on business, to expose them to the greater ecosystem. Then in some cases to accelerate those who are in the industry and get them moved along into the B2B space. And the other piece of it is to contract with them. So that's the supplier diversity side. In short, it's a lot of stuff that we're working on. And I'm responsible for that triple double initiative. And I've been responsible for the inclusive culture work stream. And I'm responsible for the diversity dashboard. And I'm looking to get rid of some responsibilities.
It's a lot. It's a lot.
It's actually too much. Yes.
Yeah, yeah. But I think I do think it's important. Like you study ecosystem, and I think I also for one specific piece of what you're doing. But I think all of that is, you know, addressing different pieces of the ecosystem as well. This and you know, I think that is a really key piece of diversity, equity, inclusion work, and really creating change is really looking at all the different pieces that come together to make that change happen. And definitely see a lot of companies focused on the pipeline, and it is much bigger than that, that we need to really focus on the ecosystem level of multiple different pieces that all work together to create change.
Exactly. Yeah, because change is really what we're after. We need to change. You know, when I started looking at numbers back in 2016, when I finally got some of the diversity reporting authorized, and I started looking at the numbers, what I've noticed is that numbers generically stay about the same. They fluctuate a little bit here and there, but they generically stay about the same. And I think that's true across the industry, especially the tech industry. Now, I don't know about Wall Street, but when you consider that the tech industry is making millionaires and Wall Street is making millionaires, and even if you're not going to be a millionaire, you can have a decent living. I think what we're missing out on is the growth, the reflection of society as we focus as a kind of a 2030 goal, 10-year goal. How do we reflect society? And how do we stop turning people off from going into the field? You see a lot of women come out of college who come out with STEM degrees, and they hang out for a year or two, and they're like, this is not the place to be. Or you see people who come out, especially underrepresented folks, come out of school and they have STEM degrees and they can't even get a job in the field. How do we change those dynamics? So change is what we're after.
Yeah. So what does allyship look like for you? What is allyship to you?
So I always say there's three components of the engagements in general. So allyship can be in the coaching side of things, it could be in the mentoring side of things, or it could be in the sponsorship side of things. Allyship as an umbrella to say, these are people who go beyond empathy toward compassion. How do we make change? And sometimes it's about that coaching, helping you, assuming they're in a position to help, which most people are, regardless of where they think they are. Is it about pulling more out of you to highlight your value, highlight your capabilities, getting that so that you yourself can see them? Because typically people get beat down over time. Or is it more about helping you navigate which way you go? And that's that mentorship piece. come off this way in the meetings. I understand that you're not trying to do that, but maybe if you do this and talk to so-and-so, you know, that kind of navigation kind of stuff. It's a part coach, part mentor. And then on the sponsorship side, and I heard something one time that really stuck in my mind is that you don't always know who your sponsors are. In fact,
Mm.
probably some of your best sponsors, you have no clue about. You have
Hmm.
no idea they spoke up for you, used any of their capital to move you along. But uh, a tremendous ally would be somebody who has compassion for your displacement or your lack of inclusion or your lack of equity, and they speak up and they advocate for you whether or not you know it. So it goes beyond helping you self-advocate to the part where someone's advocating for you. So allyship to me means, as an umbrella concept, means doing something for others that they need and can help in terms of their application.
Awesome. Yeah. So advocacy and allyship hand in hand. Advocacy is a part of allyship. Yeah. Um, and in the work you do around diversity, equity, and inclusion, how does empathy play a role?
So that's table stakes. Without, if without taking the time to even consider someone's plight or consider, you know, looking around just for a moment, just think about, oh, I guess, yeah, they probably will feel lonely if they're the only person in the room.
Yeah.
Uh, you know, so it's table stakes. You know, if you can't empathize, so it's something that we do in design thinking. The key to finding the problem to be solved is to at least gain empathy. Try to understand from the perspective of those that will be served, that will be the target audience, what exactly is it that they're missing? What is it that they need? How do they view certain things? Just getting that piece of it, I think, helps tremendously in terms of understanding, getting a basic understanding. But again, it's table stakes. You have
Mm-hmm.
to move to from there is compassion, is really putting it into play and saying, not only do I have a feel for what you're saying, yeah, I can't walk in your shoes, but I've heard what you said. And let me see if I can help. So empathy is a starting point.
Yeah. Um, could could you talk a little bit about? I think a lot of folks that listen to the podcast and they're on now are focused on diversity, equity, inclusion in their companies. Can you talk a little bit about the diversity dashboard and what's on that and how that works? How that works also to hold people accountable ultimately?
Yeah. So, you know, you can set as many goals as you want. If you don't track the data, you can't manage it.
Mm.
So the diversity dashboard, if we set a goal, like we have a goal, 30% women in management. We had one 25%. We reached it early, so we upped it to 30%. We have another goal of gender equity by 2030. When you look at the workforce, whether it's in the region or it's looked at globally, you have to have a way to track what are you doing in terms of your trend. So trend lines, looking at specific groups within the company, looking at locales, trying to find if there's a hot spot where you may find that the leadership is not uh, following along with the general plan. In the region, it
Mhm.
looks good, but there's one location, there's like something's wrong here. You know, it's like flashing lights, but I mean, they're not flashing lights anyhow. But
Yeah.
the geo map is good for that. The dashboard includes all the gender details, or it would details in general on the workforce share. And that workforce share could be regional, again, it could be global, it could be on profit centers. You can break it down any number of ways. It looks at things like promotion and progression rates. In the case of women, is the promotion and progression rate lower than for men. I mean, you're looking for items that pop out because bias is not always visible, right? You're
Mhm.
looking for those underlying kind of areas that need a little more exploration. You look at, well, we don't have pay equity in there. I don't think we get away with that one because maybe too many people have access, and legal doesn't want to have everybody looking at this stuff. But you look at attrition, and you start noticing, why do these people leave so early? Or and you think about your age. Age discrimination is a big deal. I think throughout
And you
all
you cut out
industry, honestly.
you cut out I'm sorry to interrupt. You cut out for a minute. You said attrition. You focus on attrition.
Attrition, can you hear me okay now? Oh, my connection's unstable. I think that's what it is. But can you hear me all right?
Yeah, now I can hear you. We can hear you now. Yeah.
Okay. Yeah, so attrition is a big thing. And what you're looking for, you want to be able to drive towards some observations that you otherwise wouldn't get. And just finding the attrition and other aspects, those are the things that are important. That's what the dashboard is used for. Oh, and you're asking about more so the accountability. If you have a group that is not performing well, the dashboard gives you the data to help them along. Incentive, let's call it. And if we were at the point where those incentives were aligned with your pay, it would make it very easy to say, you need to make a change. The dashboard is not meant to blame or shame. It is meant to inform. So that's the perspective.
Mm. And just kind of thinking about it practically, how do you engage leaders in that dashboard? How are you working with them to do that?
The easiest way is through the HR business partners, people who they have to depend on to do whatever it is in their interest for their particular group. Because it's always, when you talk about people and people management, it's HR.
Mm.
So it's coaching the HR business partners to utilize the data to inform the leader, to help them see the bigger picture, and to keep them aligned with what the corporation is setting as targets. We don't have quotas, but we do have targets. So the HR business partners. Other times it might be the diversity and inclusion lead, whether for a board area or for the region. I'm part of the global team. But I would say, primarily about sharing enough of the data, especially when you see a negative trend, to help them be better informed and be more performant.
Awesome. And kind of going around the ecosystem a little bit, you're also working with startups. Can you talk a little bit about that work and how that relates to all of this? How that relates to, creating change?
Yeah, well, there's one thing that's really unique about SAP, and I think most corporations have some corporate venture capital group. SAP has SAP.io. I mean, small I, big O, small input, big output. The SAP.io operation has a funding arm, so we call it the fund, and an accelerator arm, we call the foundry. And it has an initiative called No Boundaries. And in that No Boundaries initiative is the focus on women and other underrepresented founders, helping them get into the ecosystem, the business to business ecosystem, which SAP is a big player in. And there's also the opportunity to generate funds or give them funds to grow on. But tying with those operations, especially when you have an underrepresented founder, bringing them further into the network or the ecosystem, tying them back to the contracting aspects of supplier diversity, those are the pieces that are most important. Beyond things like SAP.io, the emphasis with venture operations is about giving another avenue as opposed to pure employment for a lot of these individuals, giving them the avenue of their own entrepreneurship to bring something into the fore that we need industry-wise. And so there's quite a bit of work with venture capital firms and LPs, GPs and LPs, just to understand what they're doing and try to see if there's a way we can work together to help support those operations.
Yeah. I think a lot of people, you know, it's another level of working on that ecosystem, working on that change, because what happens, a number of things happen. One is your wealth generation and the ability to, you know, for underrepresented people to grow the next wave of tech companies and really thrive there. And then I think also it's, you know, a lot of work in the tech industry, a lot of hiring in the tech industry comes from mergers and acquisitions. So you have, I assume that's a piece of it too, is, you know, that potential.
I wish I could cover the M&A part.
Oh, no, I know. But that startup ecosystem, I think is also, that is a part of that as well, right? Yeah.
Absolutely. Yeah, I think if you step back for a second, so African-American women are the #1 entrepreneurs in the United States. I think women in general are the others, but African-American women and Latinas are the tops. They're also the least supported. And they're at the same time bringing into play aspects that we just hadn't seen before, just different perspective on the businesses. And so finding a way to support them, I think is critical for society. I don't think it's just for the tech industry. I think for society. Some are those who are the providers for their families, but regardless, we're leaving way too much talent on the table. The other side of it is that underrepresented firms, these startups, are focused on profitability, very early on profitability. Tell me, did that happen with Google? Did that happen with Twitter or Facebook? Or, I mean, pretty much you name it. That's not the way things work. You get funded for growth. And so the idea is, how do we set up, how do we advocate and network to help these firms get the funding they need to grow and to really fully blossom into whatever area that they came up with? Those are the pieces that I think are really important. And yeah, it's a challenge. I'll just put it that way. It's a challenge. Yeah,
and important for us to solve.
Very.
Yeah. I'm going to go to questions in a few minutes. So if y'all have questions, please put them in the Q&A. I'm seeing a lot come up. So before we go to the questions, so you've been working on diversity, equity, and inclusion for about 5 years. Is that right?
5 years, April Fool's Day.
No, sorry.
That's my marker, April Fool's Day. Was it a complete fool or just partial? But it's really April 1st. Like March 31st next year.
And I've been working on this for, well, I mean, I've been working in this capacity in diversity and inclusion in the tech industry for about 6 years. And we've talked about, it's frustrating because it's not moving at the level that I certainly thought it would when I first started. It takes a lot of work, and it takes all of us working together, and it takes us really investigating what works, what doesn't work. Because I think a lot of times we grab onto something that's easy, not necessarily something that works. and something that other people have done, which doesn't mean it necessarily works. But my question to you is, what do you think is really gonna, what do you believe is really going to move diversity, equity, and inclusion forward?
I think it's the connection with business. It's where companies not only see the research, but they see the reality for their operation, that they are more profitable now, that they've brought these people in. I think there's been some recent information on female CEOs as an example. One of the things I like to do is if you find a stock and it looks like it's doing well, or at least it's holding its ground when everybody else is falling, and you look at the leadership team and go, oh, okay. But it's that kind of realization. I think the tie to business, to the profitability, to the relevance of a company is where it comes in. And I do not believe, I may have to be careful how I say this, or let me rephrase that. I believe that it's important for businesses, the leaders of the businesses, to recognize that being inclusive and equitable is to the best interest of the shareholders. And quite honestly, when most leaders are running companies, they are themselves also shareholders, or their compensation is tied to share prices, or the market capitalization of a firm. If we can start really managing this thing, and again, back to this diversity dashboard and analytics, if we can start showing the connection between the company's standing, whether it's the top 6 and whatever brands, or the highest profitability in a particular area, or its growth overall, and it's the net promoter score, or whatever they're using. If you can use those as measures to look at, okay, what have we changed, and if that change is the inclusiveness of the company, then you have something that ties right back, and it's like, well, that's a no-brainer. And then you start to change behavior, because ultimately it's behavior that we have to change. But people do not change without incentive. And when you have a lot of people brought in because you want to look good, your company, you want to say that we're very progressive and we're the place to work. And so you bring in a lot of people, but they don't stay and they don't have a sense of belonging. That's also an indicator. And those are the things that you want to do, is bring it down to the bottom line. Go beyond research. Companies and individuals will always say, yeah, that's the research, but that's not us. Regardless of how closely it aligns with their particular operation. You need to make it real for them. So it's about business. It's about business impact.
Awesome. Just jumping into some questions here. There's a question from Jamal around how you went from engineering to diversity. Did you have to, he asks if you had to start in HR in order to go into diversity, or did you take a specific course? How did you make that transition?
No, it probably would have been a good idea to take a course. The thing that I learned, in engineering, it's about solving the equation. First, you got to figure out what the equation is, and then you start handling what are your constants, what are your variables, and you plug everything in and you got an output. Okay, well, it's no big deal. I think this should be pretty straightforward. I know what we need to do to make these changes. That's not diversity. That's not and by the way, as Derica Blackman would say, diversity is a fact, inclusion is a practice, equity is a goal. And I always say equity is the goal. But when you look at this, this is probably better for somebody that has studied psychology. I've never had a psychology class. So I look at it based upon just human behavior. I went from my role running global DevOps to this focus in Silicon Valley on tech diversity, staying in the development organization. And it was only last year I switched to HR. This was the very first time I've been in HR. Look, I've run two companies, and there's an HR component of it, but HR in a major corporation is a whole different thing. So I think it really comes down to, and I'm reading into Jamal's question. I think it comes down to what fits for you. How do you see your ability to have impact? And does that mean you have to be in HR, or can you be in some specific line of business and get things moving? I think it's very important to be tied to the business regardless. HR is one aspect, but tied to the business is the key. So in my case, I switched into HR late. And it was a good move. It's just different.
Yeah, yeah. We have a couple of questions around the diversity dashboard. One is from Mandy. When you set your hiring goals in the dashboard, what benchmarks do you look at in order to set the reasonable but aspirational goals? As a B Corp, they're aware that simply using census data to set their aspirational goals may not be appropriate since that information lags, then they want to lead in the initiative.
I think there's two parts to this. And so if you say a reflection society, yeah, you're looking at lagging indicators to give you an idea. And you probably have to base that off of percentages of population. When you look at your hiring rates, what you're looking for is equity. Am I hiring 75% men and 25% women? Am I hiring 90% white? Or, you know, in Silicon Valley, I think our ratios are closer to 50, just in general for the tech industry, 50 some percent, whatever it is, white males, or white, I say, you know, no offense to anybody, I'm just, you know, black, white, whatever. And then the rest is Asian. And by the way, in Asian now, it's not Chinese or Vietnamese, or I mean, it's Indian and everybody from Asia, you know, so the subcontinents included. And then it's everybody else, some single digit percentages of everybody else. I think what you're looking for ultimately, and what I'm looking for, is equity. And if you're hiring, you know, in one case, you're trying to improve your numbers. So you set some target, you're trying to improve your numbers. So you may have to skew a little bit more toward hiring women. In other cases, you're really just looking for fairness. You know, do you hire women at the same rate you hire men? Do you hire people of different ethnicities at roughly the same rates as you hire anybody else? Where's the fairness? That's what you're looking for. The dashboard is really about informing and giving you an idea of what's happening. That's what you're ultimately after, is information that's not so visible. I hope I answered the question.
Yeah, the second question from Steve, how did you go about getting buy-in from leadership around the dashboard? And was there anything different that happened around Black Lives Matter? Was there anything, was there any additional convincing that needed to happen, is this question. But was there anything that happened over the last few months that is different?
I think the one thing is different is senior leaders are more willing to make commitments regarding ethnicity, and especially Black. In my case, and what we're looking at is equity across the board, so a reflection of society, not just Black and African American, but Latinx and Native. You know, so you have Pacific Islanders and everybody else, but just to level set is a reflection of society. So that's the focus. The efforts that we had on this dashboard and everything else quite preceded any of the nonsense that has further upset us. And again, you and I have talked about this. The only thing that's really different out of my lifetime, the only thing that's really different about the past few months has been the excessive stress that comes from being sheltered in place and then seeing people like you or your family murdered on television over and over and over again. It's
Mhm.
traumatizing.
Yeah.
But that doesn't mean that it didn't happen before. It means that now people use their cameras off of their smartphones to expose some of this stuff. And we're very appreciative of that. Maybe not the cadence of seeing the same thing over and over again. It's heartbreaking. So
Mhm.
really the thing that's different, I think, is, and let me put this into context. For, for me, Black Lives Matter is a continuation of the civil rights movement. We rebrand efforts from time to time. And I see Black Lives Matter, and again, no offense to anybody, but I see it as a continuation of the civil rights movement. And I
Mhm.
don't see Black Lives Matter being only about Black people. I mean, what we're talking about is equitable treatment. That's all we're really talking about here. That is the same thing as the civil rights movement, equitable treatment. And realize, even with Dr. King, there were people from the Jewish communities and other communities that were part of that movement. You don't see it. You know, history is always skewed in one way or another. But the truth is, what's different about this one, and I think the reason maybe more of our leaders have jumped in and made commitments, is because if you look at who's out there protesting, those aren't just Black people,
Mhm.
you know, and in general, it used to be if they were just Black people, it was called a riot and they were put in jail and, you know, beat up and, you know, done one way or another. There are people from all groups out there. The country, the world, everybody has to pay attention. What we're talking about is equity here.
Yeah. Question from Andrew. To manage toward diversity goals at ASAP, apart from hiring goals, do you have annual or semi-annual succession planning? You talked a little bit about that. How, you know, what do you do there? Do you have meetings? Do you have goals? Do you have metrics around that so that it's not just an HR initiative, but something leadership team owns?
Yeah, so there's promotion and progression rates, looking for equity there. And of course, as you look through the ethnicity side of things, then you can get some more intersectional points for that one. Succession plans is really interesting, the question, because uh, that was exposed as an area that we weren't putting enough emphasis on. And what we're trying to do is first get a single source of truth across the board, because there were multiple dashboards, there's multiple reporting, some ad hoc reporting. No, we want consistent single source of truth to address all of this. So you can't say, well, my data is better than yours or whatever. Single source of truth. And then if you look at the promotion progression rates and you look at them at the organizations, all the way from the first tier leader off of the board, all the way down, that's when now you can say on the succession planning, this is what it's been looking like. To be equitable, I need to make sure someone in my succession line is different than me. So those are the pieces that I think we're moving towards. So that's a really good question, by the way. And it is definitely, you know, I kind of chuckling because, yeah, that was the observation. Again, with the data, you can find a lot of stuff and you'll be shocked. You know, it's just like, think about diversity. You can't always tell what somebody is by looking at them. You know, there's the visible and invisible aspects of difference. With data, you're shining a spotlight on whatever that factor is, but you have to find the right data to expose difference. And so what you keep doing is you just keep chipping away until you go, oh, I found the gold mine, you know, that kind of deal. You know, it's that kind of way of doing things. But succession planning and succession, you know, I say execution, I know it's a bad word. Activation
Yeah.
is very important. Is very important. But yeah, you have to look at that. And promotion and progression stuff has been looked at that, but we have a ways to go still.
Awesome. Yeah, there's always more to do. Yeah. Sin asked something, kind of, the next kind of question around that in terms of difference is, you mentioned that you can only look at some variables, particularly because you have the European side where you can't measure some things. How do you, let's see, her question specifically is, how does SAP ensure that data-driven DEI strategies don't disregard unmeasurable variables? How do you make sure that you're keeping those in mind?
First of all, it's always about finding a way around the data protection and privacy folks to find what can be captured. And there's a lot of data that gets captured. It may not be flagged for reporting, or even if it's flagged for reporting, it may not have, it may be restricted in who can see it, because the way the law works is you have to, if there's something like this, you have to have a focus on mitigating the issue, whatever the issue is that you find. That's the law. And I think that's true in most countries. In terms of things that you don't see, I mean, we capture so much data, and it's about not identifying the individual. So I don't want to misstate what we're looking at. It's aggregated data. We're not trying to expose any individual's personal data. So if your data set is so small that it's so easy to guess who that is, can't report it. Can't report it. It's below reportable levels. If you're talking about religion, there are certain things. Religion, politics, they're from this particular political party, or they're this particular religion, those sorts of things. Yeah, you're not going to be able to report on those. I mean, there's no legal way around that. Maybe if you were an organization specifically for politics, but in most cases, not in corporations. You don't ask people about their political affiliation. I don't know corporations asking for people's identity, how they identify themselves, pangender, however, whatever it is. I don't see them asking those questions. And I think because there's a legal implication that you may use that data to discriminate against somebody. So it's within reason. But if there's a suggestion for something that we're missing, please let me know, because I'm all about the data.
Awesome. Danny, if there's one thing that you could ask people to do as allies right now, what is that? What is that one thing?
It's a really simple thing. Again, I mentioned that not all difference is visible. It's so simple. It's just to communicate, just to have a conversation. I used to always say, when people come into the company, I said, the number one thing that you need to do is network. Network with somebody that's not part of your team, that is just different than you. They might have a different accent, or taller, shorter, whatever. Just talk to people, because as we mentioned early on, empathy is the first step. You don't gain empathy without communication. It just doesn't happen. I mean, to my knowledge, and again, I didn't study psychology, so I'm not a social psychologist or anything like that, so I could easily be wrong. But from my perspective, you got to start with communication. So gain empathy through conversation, and then potentially you can move toward the compassion and the help, whether it's coaching, mentoring, or sponsoring. That's a good ally is somebody who will first listen, and then secondly, act.
Love it. Thank you. Thank you for this. Thank you for sharing all the knowledge that you've gained around this and doing all the work that you do.
Thank you. No, I've always found that the work you're doing, and in fact, even exposing it to a larger audience, are the pieces that may not always seem so straightforward. There are a lot of organizations doing things, but there are very few that are truly informing and helping people move beyond just listening to action. And so I do appreciate what you're doing. So thank you.
Thank you. I appreciate that. Y'all, thank you for joining. I want to dedicate this episode to Ruth Bader Ginsburg, RBG, and to John Lewis as well, both of whom recently passed and who've been really important role models for me and people who've inspired me over the years. And to everyone who has dedicated their lives and livelihoods to make a difference for other people, often pushing through significant barriers and taking personal risks to do that. So remember to keep taking action. Remember to keep moving forward to create this much needed change. And vote. Join us each week for Leading with Empathy and Allyship. Yes. You can RSVP for future sessions and sign up for our newsletter at changecatalyst.co/allyship series. And please subscribe to the podcast and the YouTube channel and give us a review if you have time, a thumbs up if you have time, and share this with colleagues. Appreciate you all, and thanks for joining. See you next week.
Thank you, Melinda. Take care.
Okay.
Bye-bye.
Take care. Bye.